Welcome to the Embodiment Matters podcast with me, Erin Giesemann Rabke, and my husband, Carl Rabke. Embodiment Matters is an ongoing, rich conversation about what it really means to be embodied and why and how embodiment matters so much in our daily lives and in our modern world. You can find out more about our wonderful guests, about our work. You can sign up for our newsletter and find out how to become a supporting member of our podcast online at embodimentmatters.com.
In this episode, we speak with Charles Eisenstein, and Charles is a good-hearted human. He's a writer, teacher, visionary. He's written several books, including Sacred Economics and The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, and most recently, Climate, A New Story. And Charles has a unique gift of being able to look at some of the stories, myths, narratives that many of us have grown up in and kind of hanging out in the space between stories as old stories kind of dissolve or no longer serve, and really imagining into new stories and possibilities, whether it's around climate or money or just being in this world as a human. So we hope you enjoy this conversation. We really enjoyed speaking with Charles, and you can find out more about his work and writings and retreats at charleseisenstein.org. Okay, well, welcome, Charles. We're really grateful to have you here and looking forward to speaking with you today. And how we usually start out these conversations is to ask, from your perspective, what is embodiment? How would you describe embodiment, and why does that matter?
I think embodiment is one of those words that if you really scrutinize what you mean, it gets a little bit iffy, because even if you're sitting there lost in your thoughts, thoughts are not some separate thing from the body. It's just maybe some more subtle way of being embodied. So, but I think that what we're talking about with embodiment is being present to and comfortable with parts of our physicality that are maybe devalued or not emphasized in our culture. So to become more at home in ourselves and in the world, that's what embodiment would be to me.
Yeah.
I think we'd like to invite you to talk a little bit about what I know you call the new story. And with your recent book about climate, and also I think your previous book that has the most beautiful title of any book ever, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Are Possible. I think that's just such a moving phrase. And for us, when you just said something about embodiment being about being more connected or more at home in ourselves and the world, I find such a deep connection between that process and growing more intimacy with the living earth, So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about the new story for people who might not be familiar with your work or what that might mean, or anything.
Sure. Yeah. So I like to hasten to add that it's a new story for modern civilization, but definitely not new on Earth.
Right.
On Earth, it's a return to an ancient story, or perhaps draws from many ancient stories. And what I mean by stories, I don't mean like once upon a time stories, but I mean the deep narratives and myths that tell us who we are and what the world is and what is real and how to do life and what's important and what's valuable. And why we are here as a species. Like, what's humanity all about? Like, these are stories that define life for us. So what I call the old story is the story of separation. The story, and part of that story is that mind is separate from body, that soul is separate from flesh, that consciousness is separate from physicality, and that humanity is separate from nature. Mm-hmm. And we have lived in that story as a civilization and enacted that story, and in some ways made that story true, so that we have separated ourselves from nature. We have entered a world in which the self is a separate individual looking out upon a world of competitors and strangers. Mm-hmm. And we have created a world in which it seems that our bodies are kind of irrelevant, or just another part of materiality that needs to be dominated. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that story it promised us great benefits. We were going to be the lords and masters of nature and live in a technological paradise and live happily ever after. And that hasn't happened. Mm-hmm. Instead, we have a growing sense that civilization is fundamentally on the wrong track. Mm-hmm. And we feel helpless to do anything about it, helpless in the face of the global crises. So that is part of the breakdown of the story, giving birth to a story which you were calling the new story, which you might call a story of interconnection, interdependency, interbeing. Mm-hmm. That says, we are fundamentally relational beings. We are of this world, and that the qualities of a being exist not only in us, but in everything. Mm-hmm. So the qualities of a selfhood, consciousness, intelligence, that's not just in our brains, that's in our bodies too. And in fact, our brains cannot be separated from our bodies. And it's also in our relationships. Mm-hmm. We, as a full being, depends on having a full complement of intimate relationships with people and with nature. And when those are cut off, I become less.
I feel that so experientially, I'm so curious. I was thinking, as Carl and I were talking last night about some of the things we wanted to mention, I was remembering that when I was a teenager, which is years ago now, being so offended to realize we were called American consumers. We're consumers, we're not even citizens or beings. And what a story that is. And, there's something about, when you're talking about relationships, I've been really moved also by, I don't know if you know Robin Wall Kimmerer's book called Braiding Sweetgrass.
Yes.
So beautiful, and so much related to what you're talking about, and about being in a respectful and even a beautiful relationship of reciprocity with life, which is so different than being a consumer, right? I'm curious about, another thing I wanted to ask you about is, if we dissolve this sense of duality that you're talking about, and even between inner life and outer life, I'm thinking of many different people, myself included sometimes, of feeling this sort of, oh my God, we have to do something about this. I have one friend who's been much more of an activist, since presidential election in 2016, and she's running herself ragged. I know that's true for a lot of people, or I'm, trying to make a lot of time to educate myself about anti-racist stuff that, I wasn't exposed to in my youth. And what do you think, or how do you actually personally, I'm interested in this in your own life, grow something like a sort of sustainability in how you're approaching life without just like coasting on privilege, How do we make it sustainable, our participation?
Oh, boy, there's a lot in that question.
Yeah.
I think that, for me, for one thing, I don't want to claim that I am not or have not in the past run myself ragged in certain ways.
Right.
And been out of balance. And I, 3 years ago, I did hit a wall of exhaustion. And it was occasion for me to question what I actually serve and how I'm serving it. Mm-hmm. paradigm of like racing around, putting out fires. Here's a crisis here, here's a crisis there. That can be so demanding and distracting that we never look at the cause for all these fires to begin with.
Right.
So putting out the fire of Donald Trump, putting out the fire of racism, putting out the fire of even climate change, it can tempt us into addressing the symptoms of these problems without going deep into the causes, because we're so busy dealing with the latest urgent crisis.
Right.
So my work has been about unearthing the deeper causes of the things that are happening on this planet that cause us so much distress. Mm-hmm. And dedicating myself to healing to a healing. Now I'm back myself to a corner with my words here. Dedicating myself to being a servant of the healing of Earth in whatever way is called from me, and whatever way activates my gifts in their best expression. So that could be, for one person, that could be doing traditional activism. But for another person, like for example, we could ask any of these questions. We could ask, what is the deep cause of racism? What is the deep cause of consumerism? Is it just that some people are bad and need to be called out and torn down and dominated and locked up? Is it that we have a bad part of ourselves that we need to go to war against? Or are these things a response to deeper conditions that we might even take for granted? So in fact, the world-destroying consumptive machine and the structures of racism are deeply connected.
Right.
Because for a few reasons. One is that they depend on some kind of dehumanization or lessening, degrading of the other. So racism is one of the ways in which we dehumanize other people. And it's on a continuum with all of the judgments that we carry that also dehumanize other people. Mm-hmm. And it is also of a kind of the reduction of nature to a bunch of stuff that's there to serve our own instrumental ends. Mm-hmm. It's all part of the same mindset. So as long as we carry a mindset of dehumanization, even if we dissuade people or shame people or educate people into no longer being racist, mm-hmm. that energy of dehumanization will find another expression. And somebody else will become the dehumanized target group.
Right.
Yeah.
So separation and domination model, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this was described brilliantly by the leftist educator Paulo Freire, who talked mm-hmm. about sub-oppression and the tendency of the oppressed to adopt the methods and mindsets of the oppressors, mm-hmm. And enacting oppression within their own ranks, or which is unusual, but if they do topple the oppressors, then they become the new oppressors and do the same thing.
Right.
And so we want to get out of that cycle. And so we need to look at the root of, what disposes us toward racism. And that's where you get into what you might call spiritual territory, like the judgments that we hold and are invited to hold by the culture on other people that explain their despicable actions as being the product of their despicable persons. Mm-hmm. This is the model that Hollywood has given us for, ever since I can remember, that why is the Joker or the whatever bad guy you're talking about, like, why is he doing this stuff? Well, he's just bad. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the solution is to destroy him in some mm-hmm. way. Right. And so this is what both sides essentially take for granted. Both sides, if you look at the media, mm-hmm. and especially the comments sections, but not just the comment sections, both sides have the same diagnosis of the basic problem in the world, which is those horrible people out there.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
Everybody is wrong.
Yeah.
As long as everybody is caught up in that, nothing is going to fundamentally change.
And it seems like that's been kind of crystallizing in its polarity, like getting, it's really that group, that party.
Right. And if only we could, tear down Trump and get him indicted and impeached, then everything would be fine. We'd be back to normal. But what was normal? Normal, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, for my entire lifetime, normal is 800 military bases around the world.
Yeah.
Normal is mass deportations. I mean, that was happening under Obama. Normal is a debt-based world-devouring machine that constantly extracts precious life from every part of the world. Like, normal is the prison industrial complex. Normal is everything that we are seeing, and so to focus all of our revolutionary energy on a superficial change actually perpetuates the problem that the deeper cause that is giving rise to all this in the first place. So it's not that, I'm not saying that, Obama was just as bad as Trump or anything like that. What I'm saying is that if we want to get out of this trap and actually live in a different kind of world, we have to stop just chasing around the symptoms, putting out the fires.
Right.
And to operate on many levels at once.
Yeah. This it reminds me of in your new book and in listening to your conversation with Russell Brand, this metaphor of a living earth and how to grow a relationship. And to me, it also seems really connected to embodiment too, because we have the same kind of mechanistic approach to our bodies as we do to the earth and ourselves as a part of the natural world. So I'd love if you could speak a little bit to the shift of, looking at something like climate from the lens of numbers and statistics and carbon emissions or living relationship.
Yeah. So suppose you're sick and you have a high fever, and you go to the doctor and he says, wow, that fever must be making you miserable. Let's take the fever down. And you feel a little bit better. And the fever's down, you're better now. Like, this is obviously obviously a rather contrived example, but it's the problem when we try to reduce health to one or another number. Now, it's true if your fever goes up to 105, 106, that could be a life-threatening condition, and you might want to take it down. But fundamentally, the fever is a symptom of something else. And even if whatever you want to use to measure your health, it could be your body mass index, it could be your cholesterol levels, it could be some level of some other hormone or something like that. Anything that can be tested medically, then you risk ignoring the things that cannot be quantified and encompassed in a medical test. And this happens to a lot of people. They go to the doctor and they're all your tests are normal, so you must be healthy. But I hurt everywhere, but I don't feel well, but I'm exhausted. Well, all the tests are normal. So what's happening is that there's something that's not on the radar screen that can't be encompassed by the metrics that the doctor is using to assess your health. So the question is, what gets left out? And the same thing, and that's when you're dealing with a body, because a body is so complex, because it's alive, there's something that will escape our attempts to reduce it to a set of numbers.
Right.
And that's different than, say, an engine. An engine, if the engine's malfunctioning, you can analytically examine it. And okay, is it this part? Is it this part? Is it this part? Its total function is essentially the sum of its parts. And you can break it down and you can identify the problem and fix it, and then everything's better. But a human body is not like that, and neither is an ecosystem or a planet. So what I'm seeing, my book is basically adopting a living system or a living being approach to Earth and saying that the health of the planet depends on the health and the vitality of all of its organs and tissues, which include the rainforests, the coral reefs, the whales, the fish, the wolves, the wetlands, the soil, the water. All of these are organs of a living being. And if you degrade those organs, even if that degradation is not obviously resulting in different greenhouse gas numbers, like if you exterminate the wolves or the grizzly bears, can you encompass that in a greenhouse gas metric? Like, can you quantify how much carbon will be emitted by exterminating wolves?
Right.
How would you do that? It seems like it wouldn't matter at all until you understand ecology and you understand that when the wolves are exterminated, the deer population explodes. When the deer population explodes, it strips the understory from the forest, which prevents the root network from holding the soil as well, which means that there's more flooding and more soil erosion, which makes a forest more susceptible to forest fires, which then exposes even more soil, which then oxidizes the soil organic matter oxidizes and makes carbon dioxide. And the forest no longer can sequester as much carbon dioxide. And then like, oh, okay, wolves do have a carbon footprint. But the approach to climate change, the approach to planet saving of measure all of the, make a carbon budget, measure the contribution of everything, and then we'll know what to do. That would be like trying to be healthy based purely on calories, how many calories you're eating. It's not that calories are totally unimportant, but even if you're in the calorie mindset, what psychological condition is driving you to eat more than you really want?
Right.
It might be because you're lonely. It might be because you're disconnected. It might be because you're in a meaningless job. And in fact, that characterizes the state of civilization right now. We are lonely because we're disconnected from our relationships to community and to nature. So of course we're going to consume. We're isolated. We're alienated. So of course we're going to want more and more and more to compensate for our lost relations and our lost beingness, because we're not separate selves. So as long as we don't address it on that level, climate change will never stop. Just like as long as you are still miserable and lonely, you're not going to stop your binge eating or whatever addiction you might have as a coping mechanism.
One of the favorite things I heard you say in a recent interview, and talking about this, because, I so appreciate going from, a single part based view to a systems view in the work that Carl and I do, with embodiment and Feldenkrais in particular. It's, your knee problem is not usually just because of your knee. It's always connected to what you're doing elsewhere in your body, et cetera. And that taking it to the bigger view out of just carbon to, as you're saying, insects and soil and wolves, and it just gets so big, right? I mean, that's like, it can feel like, oh my God, it's everything. And, what can little old me do? And I loved when you said something about the importance of just having the humility to say, we have no idea. We don't know what to do. And I think it's like maybe why a lot of people avoid it. Even looking at climate change, like even a lot of people I know who care sort of can't bear to look at it, something about, I just would love you to say something about not knowing as a foundation to maybe a more intimate relationship. And then where do you go from there?
Yeah. I think not knowing is a good place to start. It's much better than false knowing.
Yes.
And then it opens the door to true knowing. Real knowledge is built on a foundation of, I don't know. I don't know what I thought I knew. So now I'm open to knowing in a different way and knowing different things. Let me just gather my thought about this. Yeah, so our conventional approach to problem solving is that first you have to figure out the solution. And that locution, figure out, is really significant. It brings to mind writing down the facts and the figures, doing some math, figuring it out. And once you've figured out the highest impact leverage point that you can act on, then you go and do that. So that presupposes that we can figure it out, that we can reduce this tremendously complex, interrelated, dynamic system into some data that allows us to, with predictability and control, exercise our force at the most effective leverage point. And that is a completely ridiculous supposition, I think. So what is the alternative? If we just really don't know how this thing works, where I go with it is that I go to really to the intelligence of the planet and the intelligence of the cosmos that, in a sense, does have it figured out, that is willing to deploy each one of us in the most necessary role for the healing of the planet, and that communicates to us through the listening organ of the heart by appealing to our care and putting us in that situation where our gifts come to the fore with the intention of healing whatever has been put in front of our faces. So that could be like, they could be stopping a road or a pipeline or a fracking project or something like that. It could be something like that that is quite easy to fit into the climate change paradigm, but it may not be. It could be working with homeless people, or working with incarcerated men, or working to revitalize a dying language. That's a lot harder to, quote, justify in terms of an imminent climate collapse. But when you go to the level of what are the deep causes, then you realize that all of this, as you were saying, it's everything. So healing in one realm is part of a healing of all things. And we realize that it is impossible. If we are living in a society that dehumanizes people, locks them away, destroys their lives, exploits the most vulnerable, we are also going to be a society that does the same thing to nature, same kinds of things to nature. It's all part of the same matrix. So the things that we need to do to change it fundamentally on any of those levels will contribute to an overall change on every level. And that means that we can trust this organ of the heart that calls us into service to whatever little aspect of the project of world healing that appeals to us, that has come into our field. Yeah.
I think it's so beautiful. And I just want to say, I was talking with a friend recently about this. We attended a workshop with Michael Mead, who talks a lot about your individual genius and bringing it forward and kind of letting go of the myth that there's one or two heroes who are going to save us, but how important each of us, our contribution is. And we both have young children. I know you do too. And she said, we need the Disney movie of that story instead of the hero to have like the community, and I don't know that exists yet, so I don't know, maybe someone's contribution is to make the Pixar or Disney version of everyone bringing their gifts forward,
Yeah. Yeah, there are now, some filmmakers who are entering this consciousness and making films that are not about good triumphs over evil.
Right.
But that involve other paths to healing, such as a change of heart.
Right.
Such as redemption. I always am deeply moved by movies like that and disappointed when a movie that seems to be going that way ends up defaulting back into the paradigm of the bad guys destroyed and good prevails in the universe.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I liked even like the Star Wars movie, what was it called, with Kylo Ren, and like there's like this hint that maybe he's not so horrible after all.
Right. Or maybe the heroes aren't so perfect after all.
Yeah.
That they each have their
Right.
struggles with both.
And in that movie, it was just a little hint of it, like there was still like that evil guy or whatever, but I don't know, like I almost, every time there's even a hint of it, it just gives me such hope for humanity.
Yeah.
I don't think that good finally triumphs over evil is a realistic prescription for changing the world.
No.
If you could divide the world into good versus evil, evil's stronger. So let's not do that.
Yeah.
let's ask, what does it take for those who we see as evil, those who we hold in judgment and dehumanize, actually, like this is the same paradigm. If you dehumanize anybody, you are contributing to the field of dehumanization. That is this one and the same with the field of misogyny and racism and bigotry and xenophobia.
Yeah.
So what is, like how can we, then the question is, how do we create conditions for a change of heart? We can study, how does that happen?
That's really important. What do you think? Like, I'm thinking for someone who's listening to you, like, who wants to ground this in their own life, what would you invite?
Well, one thing is to become clear on what we serve. Do you serve in yourself? Do you serve victory, or do you serve healing? Do you serve defeating your opponent, or do you serve a more beautiful world? One of the participants in a retreat I just held, we worked with this a lot on the retreat, and so she goes back home and she's in a club, and there's like this bro dude, who comes up and is like really kind of aggressive, and hitting on her, and then like says some racist thing, and she in that moment remembers like, yeah, I could just call the guy out, I could humiliate him, but on some level knowing that if she does that, he's just going to go back and nurse his resentments on 4chan, and his self-rejection, which maybe is coming from childhood, his shame is going to actually intensify. So she would have the satisfaction of shaming him in public and humiliating him, and I'm a person of color and you're not, and but she asked herself, what do I serve? And so she responded with kindness. Eventually he apologized, like he had an experience of, we're all in this together. Like as I know this guy in Oakland, Pancho Ramos Stierle, he says, there's a victim on both ends of the gun.
Yeah.
So if we can hold that understanding, we then become creators of the conditions for a change of heart. If you can look at that bro dude and be like, that's not who you really are, that's not who you want to be, and hold them in that story, then the story that we hold them in becomes an invitation for them to be that. And that's what my friend, who's at the retreat, was able to do. She held this man in a story that did not say, oh, I know you're just a racist, woman-hating bigot. I know you frat boy, you like, she was offered that story by her mind, but she was like, no, I'm not going to go there, because what does that serve?
Yeah, Charles, it seems like, these deep narratives, that they're so pervasive, like the wallpaper of life that we've grown up in, and how, like, again, for someone listening, like, how do you find out what some of your deep invisible narratives are and what they're serving?
Actually, can I just, before I answer that, can I just say one more thing about that? Just for clarity, I am not telling people of color or women, oh, don't be angry at the perpetrators.
Yes.
Yeah.
All I'm saying, like, I'm not qualified to say that. And in fact, I'm not I don't believe that people should not, quote unquote, be angry. I'm just talking about what has to happen for real change to take place in the world. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, yeah. Or another way to look at it is, where do you direct the anger? One way to maintain the status quo is to create a world story that directs the anger at symptoms and not causes.
Right.
So if we have a story that says, when people do bad things, it's because they are bad people, then the anger gets directed at the people. And the energy of revolutionary change then is converted into dominating and destroying, rather than changing the conditions that give rise to that behavior that makes us angry. So yes to the anger, but please be aware of the trickery that has us fighting each other forever. It's divide and conquer.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, what was your other question then?
I was just talking about how so often our deep narratives are invisible to us because it's just the waters we grew up in. And how does one start to look at what their narratives are and what they're serving?
Well, there's a bit of a paradox in that question, because by even asking that question, directing attention to that.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe the answer to the question is ask the question.
Yeah.
And maybe some of the things that have come up in this conversation will point people's attention to unconscious narratives that then become conscious. So the process is, what was unconscious becomes conscious. As it becomes conscious, it loses its power to compel us. It still might operate for a while. You still might become like really aware of the way that you're judging people and dehumanizing them, or the way that you're inviting them into a lesser story than what they could really be. And then it's like, oh my God, I did that again. I'm doing it right now. When's it going to stop? I really want it to stop. And eventually that process though does weaken it. And then another thing is, then when you are in judgment, when you are in a holding pattern with another person that names them as less than what they can be, then to look inside and feel what it feels like to be in that relationship, and feel like what hurts, how does it kind of feel good to be judging that person as a douchebag, and or whatever it is, like how does that kind of feel good? What wound is operating in me? Where does it hurt? That feels good. And then again, it's like just bringing that into awareness, and the unmet needs that we might have. The need, there are a lot of unmet needs that are built into our current society and our current economy. It's not that you're bad and that you've got to up your game. Yes, there are ways we can up our game, but we have to recognize that we are in very hostile conditions. It is totally not normal to look outside and not know, here, I'm looking outside, there's some houses here. I don't know this, you've only been in this neighborhood for a few months, okay, but some of you it might be different, but I look at these houses, I don't know the story of what's going on in those houses. I look at, there's like a little rise over there, a little hill. I don't know the stories that have happened on that hill. It's not part of my matrix of meaning in this world. And I don't know what kind of tree that is that's lost all its leaves, and what the medicine of its roots could be. And my neighbor's grandfather, who had maybe an experience in that stream over there of some sort. I don't know any of that. Like, this is not normal for us to be plunged into an alien physical and social landscape. So I want to invite some compassion for ourselves. We are in very hostile territory, the territory of separation. So, this depletion mirrors an inner depletion. And as we bring attention to that, as we bring it to both levels, the inner and the outer, then we create an invitation, a yearning for that to be healed. And when something comes that can meet those unmet internal and external needs, we recognize it and we want to bring that in. So that's like a very mundane way in which consciousness and attention are part of a healing process. There's mysterious levels too, but this is totally not mysterious. You become aware of it, and then instead of enacting the addictive behavior that comes from an unmet need, we're able to actually meet the need itself.
So I guess I have a question about, maybe this is a multifaceted thing. So there's a certain way in which the whole climate change situation sits with me really particularly as a parent, with just this deep concern and some fear, and well, more than some fear, pretty big fear actually for future generations, and then just in the last month, there's been this report about climate change that comes out. And then I saw another article in one of the main, I don't know if it was New York Times or something, about we have 12 years to, really change something, like with this deadline. And I just started feeling like there's no way that these forces that are out of my hands, the ones who seem to have the power to pollute and, whatever, that situation. So one part of this is I'm curious how you hold something like that, a report with a timeline to it. And the other question is, how do you make sense of the fact at this time, or maybe there is no making sense of it, doesn't make sense to me. So I'm curious if you have a way to make sense of it, that at this time when it really feels like this healing feels so imperative, like, let's turn it up, that these right-wing, like the president, I don't remember his name, in Brazil, who's so extreme.
Bolsonaro, yeah.
Exterminate indigenous people in the rainforest and cut it all down for profit. And Trump here and, groups rising, like, how is that happening at this time when, it feels so imperative for the opposite? I'm so confused about that on the collective level.
Yeah.
That question, but just whatever you want to say to that.
Well, there's a bunch of things I could say. First, I want to say that those predictions, 12 years, et cetera, they've been saying that for a long time. And I am not alarmed by that. I don't have a lot of trust in the climate models that are used to make those predictions. And I don't think that global warming per se is the main problem. And I don't think that the future of humanity's survival is at stake. I think what's at stake is even bigger than that. And the crisis or the loss is happening ongoingly, whether or not the models are correct. And it's, to go back, it's the degradation of the organs and tissues of a living planet.
Right.
So as long as that's happening, so one of the things that came out of my book is that the role of these organs that I mentioned before, the rainforest, the wetlands, the prairies, the whales, the soil, et cetera, the role of those organs in maintaining the health of the being of Earth is more important than science has generally recognized, and is not only a function of their carbon sequestration role. Actually, a lot more has to do with the role of water in maintaining conditions for life on Earth. The basic principle being that life creates the conditions for life to thrive. So where we are going, the my nightmare scenario isn't human extinction. And I'm not saying that couldn't happen, but my nightmare scenario is that we actually manage to survive on a world that's becoming more and more dead. This has actually been happening.
Yeah.
We have, in the last century, population has increased threefold. GDP has increased whatever, fivefold, tenfold. Life expectancy has gone up dramatically, although that's really leveling off. Like by all these external metrics, humans are fine. Humans are fine, but life on Earth, we have half the fish biomass we have when I was a kid. We have a quarter of the flying insect biomass. The butterflies are dying, the bees are dying, the bats are dying. The rainforest, the Amazon is 20% smaller. The Borneo rainforest is almost gone. Life is dying on Earth. So my question is, what is going to stop that trend from continuing? A trend of the external metrics, excuse me, the trend of the external metrics of human well-being staying steady or even rising, and life degrading, life perishing on Earth. What is going to change that? So, yeah, so I think that a lot of the, I think that, just to be clear, I do think that greenhouse gases are a problem, especially when the biosphere has been so degraded that it can't handle fluctuations in greenhouse gases as well as it could. If we had intact rainforests, if we didn't have half the number of trees that there once were, if we still had massive seagrass meadows, in New England, I think 80% of them or something are gone. Like they sequester enormous amounts of carbon. If we still had the high grass prairies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then higher levels of greenhouse gases may not be a problem.
Yeah.
But we do not have that. In fact, we have a steadily disintegrating biosphere that is less and less able to handle challenges like that. So, so while I do think greenhouse gases are a problem, I don't think that they need to be the dominant narrative of environmentalism, especially when it's become this really polarizing issue.
Right.
And there's a lot more. I've got articles out about this, and my book is about this. So part of what's happening with Trump and Bolsonaro is it's the expression of the polarization that we were talking about earlier. They are magnets for a polarized identity that people can take up and see their man, Trump, as the paragon of good in the war against evil.
Yeah.
And so whatever he says, they're aligned with it. Whatever he says, they believe it. And there's so many other things I could talk about. Like in the case of Brazil, the structure of the global economy that demands of countries and people and corporations that they find some way to meet their debt obligations. So a country like Brazil, or any country in South America, they have a debt burden, and that has to be met with hard currency. And the only way to get hard currency is through exports. And so what are you going to export when your debt burden is ever increasing? Like you have to cut down your rainforest. You have to drill the minerals. You have to open it up for development. So for us in the West to say, stop cutting down the rainforest, but please continue servicing your debts that you can only service by cutting down the rainforest. That is hypocrisy. And that's a level of the problem that is rarely talked about in the mainstream media.
Charles, I love this term that you've used of how we're in these times are like a global initiation. And can you talk a little bit about what qualities of initiation we're in now and what potential outcomes could be?
Yeah. Well, one way to look at an initiation is that you're put in a situation that your previous coping mechanisms are unable to deal with. So you have a dilemma. You don't know what to do. And that not knowing what to do calls forth gifts and capacities that had previously not been available.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is happening to humanity. Initiation also invites a shift of perception, a different way of seeing yourself, and a different way of knowing yourself, and a different way of seeing and knowing the world. A different kind of relationship between you and your community, or between you and your environment, or between you and your spouse or your lover or your child. Like all of these life initiations change. Because they change us, they also change our relationships. And this also is being invited of humanity. And specifically, the initiation is into a new story of interbeing, where we no longer see the world as other, where we no longer think that human progress means the domination and ascent over the world, but rather our participation in the world and our service to life on Earth, to its thriving and to its evolution. That's what we're being initiated into. So part of the initiation, it has to come from love. It has to come from, this gets back to what you were saying before, about bringing children into the world and what's the future going to be like. So we're being initiated, I think, into caring for the world, not because of the bad things that'll happen to us if we don't. We only have 12 years, or bad things will happen to us. What about bad things will happen to the wolves? Bad things will happen to the whales. Bad things will happen to the trees if we don't change our ways. Why should we care about the trees? This question is part of the problem. If you ever have to ask, well, why should I care about the cloud forest of Costa Rica? Then that means you do not love that cloud forest. I never have to say, well, why should I care about my son? If he gets sick, if something bad happens to him, if he gets a poor education, well, who cares? That's him, not me.
Right.
Yeah.
I would only say that if I don't love my son. So this whole instrumental narrative about why we should care about nature, why we should stop climate change, why we should stop killing the whales, why we should conserve the rainforests, it's based on the wrong premise. It's based on the pre-initiatory premise of the world is here for us.
Right.
The post-initiatory premise would be, you wouldn't even have to ask that question. Because we have fallen back in love with the world. That's what we're being initiated into, not being initiated into more cleverly deploying the natural resources available to us. This is a bigger revolution than that.
Yeah.
I just love that. It's, I'm going to have to go back and re-listen to our recording of how we got there from this dire 12-year report to like, all of a sudden I have this smile on my face. I'm like, yeah, falling in love with the world. Like, what a beautiful invitation and a reframe that's also so personal and so beyond the personal,
Yeah, and it's not saying, oh, so there's no problem and you can just go to life as normal.
Right.
It's saying, yeah, fall in love with the world, and where does that love take you? Like, what service to this world that you love is now called forth from you?
I love that. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're very welcome.
I just want to say, so appreciate this conversation and just deeply appreciate your work in the world. And I feel like there's 100 more things we could explore and talk about with you, but I'm really grateful for what we got to today. And just thanks so much.
Yeah, it was really a pleasure to talk to you, Carl and Aaron.
Yeah, thank you so much, Charles.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, it's great if you want to share it with friends or post about it on social media. Also, you could make a donation to support the podcast or find out more information about our classes and offerings at our website, embodimentmatters.com.